The summons smelled of cheap ink and final betrayal. My son, Mark, was suing me. Not for money, not for an inheritance. He was suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress and property damage at his own wedding. They wanted $50,000, the exact amount I had paid for the damned event. They thought I would pay for silence. They were wrong. My name is Eleanor Vance. At 56. I'm a senior project manager at Aperion Solutions, a tech firm here in Austin. My mornings are a precise ritual. I wake at 5:30 a.m., shower, review the Asian markets, and then, at exactly 6:15 a.m., I sit at my kitchen counter with my first cup of black coffee. The apartment is quiet, high above the waking city. I value this structured peace. It is the foundation upon which I built my life after my husband died 20 years ago. The foundation upon which I raised my son. This morning, a Tuesday, the routine was shattered by the sharp buzz of the intercom. It was 7 a.m., too early for casual visitors, too late for a crisis. I frowned, pressing the button. A muffled voice announced, "Delivery." A moment later, a process server, a young man looking bored and tired, stood at my actual door. He handed me a thick manila envelope and a clipboard, mumbled, "Eleanor Vance," and slid the clipboard back when I nodded, already turning to leave. I carried the envelope back to the kitchen island, the coffee forgotten. It felt stiff, official. I assumed it was from the condo board. They had been threatening new assessments for the pool resurfacing for months. I slid my thumb under the flap and pulled out the folded documents. The cheap copy paper felt cold. I unfolded it. My name was at the top. Stark and black Eleanor Vance. Defendant. I blinked. The words blurring. Defendant. This was not about a swimming pool. My eyes scanned down the page, hunting for the other name, the one that would make this make sense. Plaintiff Mark Vance and Chloe Sterling. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. Mark, my son, my only son, and his new wife. I sank onto the kitchen stool, my legs suddenly unsteady. The granite counter felt icy beneath my palms. I read the words, but my brain refused to assemble them into meaning. Allegations, destruction of property. Specifically one wedding gown valued in the tens of thousands of dollars. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. The location their wedding venue, 3 weeks prior. And then, the demand. The amount they were seeking in damages, $50,000. A sharp, hysterical laugh almost escaped me. 50,000. It was the exact amount I had wired them. The amount I gifted them to cover the deposit on the outrageously expensive winery they had chosen. It was the money I had earmarked for my own kitchen remodel. A sacrifice I had made without a second thought because Mark had sounded so happy. The memory of the wedding flooded back. Not the manicured joy of the photos, but the reality. The sting of Chloe's final shriek. The sight of Mark, his face pale and shuttered, standing by her side, watching as security guards, actual guards, politely but firmly escorted me from the reception. I had walked past the rows of imported flowers I had paid for, my face burning, my heart shattering. I had left in tears, humiliated and utterly bewildered. My hand was shaking as I grabbed my phone. I pressed Mark's name. Straight to voicemail. The cheerful recording he'd had for years felt like a cruel joke. "Mark, I just received this," I said, my voice dangerously unsteady. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of horrific, misplaced joke, call me. Please, just call me back." I hung up and stared at the phone, willing it to ring. I must have misunderstood. He would call, horrified, and explain that the lawyers had made a terrible mistake. A minute later, the screen lit up. A text message. From Mark. My heart leaped with relief until I read it. Mum, stop calling. Our lawyer will be in touch. You went too far. Chloe deserves justice. I read the message once, twice, a third time. The words remained the same. Mum, stop calling. Our lawyer. Justice. The chill that started in my stomach was not from the morning air. It was the cold, hard realization that this was not a misunderstanding. This was not a mistake. This was a calculated, deliberate attack, and it had been launched by my own son. The papers in my hand were not a request for an apology. They were a declaration of war. The summons was a physical weight in my hand, but the memory was a psychological one, playing out in agonizing, high-definition clarity. 3 weeks ago, the wedding. It was exactly what Chloe had wanted, an absurdly opulent affair at a glass and steel winery nestled in the Texas Hill Country. The setting sun cast everything in a buttery, forgiving light, making the scene look like a perfect, polished advertisement. An advertisement I had largely paid for. I am a widow. My husband died 20 years ago, leaving me with a 6-year-old Mark and a mountain of determination. I poured everything I had into that boy, into Aperian Solutions, building a life for us from the wreckage. I had tried so hard to welcome Chloe, to see what Mark saw in her, but her family, the Sterlings, were a different breed. They were old, corrosive money, and they looked at me as a temporary inconvenience, a relic from Mark's less impressive past. The warning signs had been there for months, painted in shades of polite condescension. When I suggested a floral arrangement I'd seen, Chloe had patted my hand. Eleanor, that's sweet, but your style is a little outdated. Just let us handle the aesthetics. I was demoted from Mom to Eleanor. And soon, Mark followed suit in her presence, the new name feeling like a small stone in his mouth. At the reception, I nursed a glass of champagne I hadn't paid for. It was from her father's private stock, as she'd loudly informed everyone. I drifted near the raw bar, and I overheard Chloe's mother, Mrs. Sterling, speaking to a guest. Her voice was low and sharp. It's such a blessing Mark finally escaped that shadow. Chloe really saved him from a mediocre life. A mediocre life. The one I'd built. The one that paid for his Georgetown law degree. I felt a cold prickle, but I swallowed it, just as I had swallowed every other insult. Then came the speech. I had worked on it for weeks, trimming it down, polishing it. It was about the funny, kind boy I knew, the dedicated man he'd become. I stood up, my hands shaking slightly, and approached the microphone. Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Mark's mom, I began. I looked at Mark, but he was whispering to Chloe, laughing. I cleared my throat and tried again. I remember when Mark was 6. I got no further. Suddenly, the speakers crackled, and a deafening wave of dance music flooded the terrace. I stopped, confused. I looked at the DJ, who looked equally bewildered, then pointed toward the head table. Chloe was leaning over, whispering animatedly to the band leader, gesturing for him to turn it up. She looked back at me, flashed a brilliant smile, and raised her glass as if I had just made the world's greatest toast. My speech, my words, were erased, swallowed by a wall of sound. I stood there for a humiliating 10 seconds before I slowly walked back to my table, my face burning. Later that night, I just wanted to leave. But my purse and my car keys were in the bridal suite, where Chloe had insisted all the inner circle store their things to keep the main hall clear. I slipped away from the party, the thumping bass vibrating in my chest, and walked down the quiet, stone-lit path to the suite. I pushed the door open, and the sound of a raised voice stopped me. It was Chloe. She had her back to me, and in front of her stood a young catering assistant, a girl who couldn't have been more than 20, holding an empty tray. "You incompetent little idiot," Chloe hissed, her voice unrecognizable. She was holding a full, dark glass of red wine. "You nearly ruined my father's toast. You ruin everything." "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," the girl whispered, clearly terrified. Before I could announce myself, before I could tell Chloe to stop, she turned. She saw me standing in the doorway. Her eyes, which had been burning with rage, went suddenly, terrifyingly still. A slow, cold look of calculation passed over her features. She looked at me, looked at the wine in her hand, and then looked at the magnificent $10,000 dress hanging on the door. Then, with a deliberate, smooth motion, she reared back and threw the entire glass of red wine straight onto the pristine white silk. The dark liquid exploded across the bodice, a violent stain. The catering girl gasped. I froze, unable to process what I had just seen. Chloe let the empty glass drop from her hand. It shattered on the floor. She took one look at her ruined dress, one look at me, and then she inhaled. She opened her mouth and screamed. It was a raw, primal shriek of manufactured grief. "What did you do?" she wailed, rounding on me, her face a mask of tears and horror. "You ruined it. You ruined my wedding. You hate me. You hate me." The door flew open. Mark burst in, his face panicked from the screaming. He stopped dead, his eyes darting between us. He saw me, frozen in the doorway. He saw the terrified server, and he saw Chloe, collapsing in a heap, pointing a shaking finger at me while sobbing over the desecrated dress. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet. "Mark, I didn't—" I started, but Chloe's wails redoubled. "She did it. Mark. She hates me. She threw wine all over my dress. She ruined it." "Mom," he yelled, and this time his voice was filled with a fury I had never heard. How could you do this to her?" I tried to explain, to tell him what I saw, but he wouldn't listen. "Get her out," he said, his voice flat, looking at the security guard who had followed him in. "She's done. Get her out of here." I was escorted out of my son's wedding. I didn't even get my purse. I sat at my kitchen counter for a long time. The coffee in my mug was cold, but I didn't notice. Mark's text message was a glowing wound on the dark screen of my phone. "Chloe deserves justice." The words echoed in the silence, and with each echo, another piece of the past slotted into place. This wasn't an impulsive, grief-stricken lashing out from a ruined wedding night. This was the final move in a campaign I had been too blind, too hopeful, to see. I remembered the day Mark first brought Chloe home. She was a portfolio of perfection, bright, articulate, from a good family. And she looked at my son like he was the center of the universe. I was so desperate for him to be happy. I ignored the small, sharp edges of her comments. "Mark told me you raised him all by yourself," she'd said, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "It must have been so so hard. I mean, financially, Aperion Solutions is nice, of course, but just one income. Wow. Then came the change in Mark. It was slow, at first, a gradual erosion. My son, the boy who would call me from college just to tell me about a funny professor, became a man I barely recognized. He was a man who constantly sought the approval of Chloe and her wealthy, judgmental family. He started calling me Eleanor when we were around the Sterlings. The first time he did it, I thought he'd misspoken. The second time, I saw the quick, approving nod Chloe gave him. The word Mom had become a liability, a symbol of his mediocre past. The incidents piled up, small humiliations I was expected to absorb. The Thanksgiving dinner, 6 months ago. It was our first holiday at the Sterlings' massive, sterile home. I'd spent all day baking my mother's pumpkin pie, the one Mark always claimed was his favourite thing on earth. I walked in, so proud to contribute something personal. Chloe took it from me with a bright smile. "Oh, Eleanor, you didn't have to." And then, as she turned to the counter, her wrist faltered. The pie plate slipped, shattering on the marble floor. "Oh, clumsy me," she'd gasped, laughing, a small, tinkling laugh. "Oh, well, no great loss. We have the dessert from Dad's private chef anyway." I stood there, staring at the pumpkin and glass on the floor, my hands empty. Later, when I found Mark alone, he'd just sighed, annoyed. "She's stressed. Mum, it's just a pie. Don't make a scene." It was never about the pie, just as this lawsuit was not about the dress. The dress was merely the excuse they needed, the public spectacle to justify the final cut. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted to profit from my exit. They wanted to make me pay, literally, for the inconvenience of my own existence. This realization sent a new, colder spike of dread through me. It was one thing to be hated. It was another to be systematically plundered, driven by a sick, dawning clarity. I walked to my home office and woke up my laptop. I opened my email archive. I searched for Mark's name and finances. It didn't take long. An email from just over a year ago, before the engagement was even official. The subject line was, "Quick question." "Hey, Mom," it read. "Chloe and I were mapping out our future and looking at our finances. Her parents are helping us with a lot, and they were just asking a few questions about my school days. They were wondering why you didn't contribute more to my college fund, since I told them you have a good job at Aperion. Can you send me a breakdown of what you paid for, just so I can tell them? It would really help me look good." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. They hadn't just started this. They had been investigating me, auditing my value. They had been looking into my finances for more than a year, judging what I had and what they could take. This lawsuit wasn't an act of passion. It was the last item on a balance sheet. They didn't just want me out of their lives. They wanted to drain my accounts on the way out. The grief evaporated. It left a vacuum, and what rushed in to fill it was something cold, sharp, and blessedly familiar focus. The tears stopped. My hands, which had been trembling, were now perfectly steady. I was no longer a mother mourning the loss of her son. I was Eleanor Vance, Senior Project Manager at Aperion Solutions, and I had been presented with a hostile takeover bid. The objective was to liquidate my assets and remove me from the board. I sat down at my desk, my laptop humming to life. The warm, personalized photos of Mark on my screensaver were an irritation. I changed the background to the default grey grid of my Aperion desktop. Better. I opened a new Excel spreadsheet. The clean, white cells were a comfort. This was my arena. I titled the sheet, Mark Vance Investment Ledger. I did not start with his childhood, with the braces or the summer camps. I started with the day he decided to become a man who could be bought by the Sterlings. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a rhythmic, precise tapping. Column A item, column B date, column C cost. I started with his education. Georgetown University Law Center tuition, P&O, I typed. In the cost column, I entered $180,000, paid in full. I had cashed out a mutual fund my own father left me to ensure he graduated debt-free. A gift. I had called it then. An investment. I saw it as now. Next. Down payment, the Austonian condominium. The high-rise he had to have to be taken seriously as a new associate. $75,000. My bonus from the Apex project, wired directly to an escrow account. Next. Vehicle purchase assistance, BMW 4 Series. The car he needed to impress Chloe when they first started dating. My clunker, as he'd affectionately called my reliable sedan, wouldn't do. $30,000. I paused, and for the first time, I added the item that had brought us here. Wedding gift, Texas Hill Winery venue deposit, $50,000. I highlighted the cost column. I hit the sum function. The number appeared at the bottom of the list instantly. $335,000. I stared at that figure. Over $300,000 in just the last 5 years. That number did not include the endless checks for groceries, the bar tabs I'd covered, the flights home, the suits, and they were suing me for $50,000 for a dress she destroyed. The absurdity was so profound, so insulting. It was almost elegant. This was not a lawsuit. It was a final, contemptuous shakedown. They were not seeking justice. They were seeking seed money, and they had identified me, the mediocre mother, as the most convenient bank to rob. The anger was there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. But it was a productive anger. It was the anger that fueled me through all-nighters at the office, the anger that helped me find solutions to impossible logistical problems. And as I sat there, staring at the numbers, another logistical problem occurred to me. Another financial tie I had not yet entered into the spreadsheet. I minimized the Excel window and opened my secure document vault. I navigated to a folder labeled Leases. Mark had needed a co-signer for his first big boy apartment, and he had never bothered to take me off. When he and Chloe upgraded, they needed my income on the application to get the penthouse they wanted. I found the file. Lease agreement, Sterling Vance, The Independent. I opened the PDF. I was listed, plain as day, as guarantor. My signature was right there, a digital artifact of my blind trust. I checked the dates. The lease was not up for another 6 months. A thought, cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, formed in my mind. They lived in that penthouse. They hosted parties there. It was the entire foundation of the image they presented to the Sterling's world, and it was all underwritten by me. This was not revenge. Revenge was messy, emotional. This was risk management. This was leverage. They had shown me their opening move. They had no idea I was already planning the endgame. I was in the middle of a high-level budget review at Aperion, my screen filled with the comforting, logical flow of spreadsheets, when my assistant buzzed my line. "Eleanor, your son is here. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's insistent. Insistent. I clicked off the intercom. Before I could even stand, the door to my office swung open. Mark. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was wrinkled. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he was radiating an anger so potent it felt like a physical heat. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, slamming the door behind him. I kept my voice perfectly level, the same one I used for failing vendors. "You're going to have to be more specific, and you don't barge into my office. Mark. My lawyer got a motion to dismiss from your lawyer," he snapped, throwing his briefcase onto one of my guest chairs. "You're countersuing, you're dragging this out. What is wrong with you?" I stood slowly, motioning toward the glass-walled conference room that adjoined my office. "We will not have this discussion here." I walked past him, and after a moment's hesitation, he followed, his fury a palpable thing. I shut the door, sealing us in the soundproof box. "I am defending myself. Mark," I said, turning to face him. "You are suing me. Chloe is traumatized," he almost shouted. "You destroyed the most important memory of her life. We gave you a chance to make this right. Just apologize, pay for a new dress, and this all goes away." A cold laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Pay for a new dress? You're demanding $50,000. Mark, not 10, not 20, 50. The exact number I gave you. You think I'm stupid. You don't get it." He exploded, his hands clenching at his sides. "You just don't get it. Do you? Her family? They think you're some jealous, unhinged mess. They think I married into this. You're embarrassing me." There it was. Not his grief, not his wife's trauma. His embarrassment. The truth. Finally, laid bare under the fluorescent lights of my conference room. "This isn't about a dress," I said, my voice dropping. "This is about you being ashamed of me. Isn't it ashamed that I'm just a project manager? Ashamed that I had to work for everything I have, instead of having it handed to me on a silver platter by a powerful family?" Mark's angry expression faltered, replaced by a sneer I had never seen before. It was a sterling family sneer. "You think you made it?" he scoffed. "You think this little office, this little job, is impressive? You have no idea what real power is. You know who Chloe's father is. You know what he's capable of." He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. "He could ruin you at Aperion. He could destroy your entire career with one phone call. One." I looked at him. I looked at this stranger wearing my son's face, this weak, posturing boy who had traded his past for a hollow, expensive future. I searched for any flicker of the child I had raised, the boy I had loved more than my own life. There was nothing, just the cold, reflected ambition of the Sterlings, the last ember of maternal warmth in my heart, the one that had stubbornly glowed through all the insults and humiliation, finally went out. It died, and left a cold, clean void. "Then tell him to try," I said. Mark's face went slack, the bluster deflating. "What? Tell your father-in-law to make the call. I'd be very interested to see how it goes." I walked to the conference room door and held it open. "Get out of my office. Mark, the next time I see you, it will be in court." He just stared, his mouth slightly open, stunned into silence by my coldness. He had come in expecting a crying, hysterical mother he could bully into submission. He had found an executive. He picked up his briefcase, his hand fumbling for the handle. He walked past me without another word. The door shut with a soft, final thud. I hired a lawyer the next day, Her name was Maria Diaz, a sharp, no-nonsense litigator whose office was in a sleek downtown building, not unlike my own. I sat across the polished mahogany desk from her as she finished reading the summons, her expression unreadable. "Well, Mrs. Vance, it's a messy one," she said, finally looking up. She folded her hands. "I'll be candid with you. Eleanor, this is a classic he said, she said. Or in this case, a mother said, bride said. And let me tell you who wins that fight 9 times out of 10. The bride. Chloe will get on the stand. She will weep. She will talk about her sacred day and the most important memory being destroyed by a jealous mother-in-law. It's a theatre performance, and it is very, very effective. Winning this will be difficult. I had anticipated this. I'm not here to win a popularity contest. Mrs. Diaz, I said, my voice calm. I am not interested in winning. I am interested in the truth. And I do not believe this is my word against hers. I believe this is her word against the facts. Facts are slippery in family court, Diaz warned. These facts are not, I said. I slid my laptop, which I had brought for this precise purpose, across her desk. I had the spreadsheet open. They are suing me for $50,000. They claim this is for the dress and emotional distress. I would like to file a motion to introduce the complete financial context of my relationship with my son. Mrs. Diaz's eyebrows rose as she scanned the screen. Georgetown Law, $180,000. Condo down payment, $75,000. BMW, $30,000. Wedding gift, $50,000. Total, $335,000. She looked at me. The opposition will paint you as a petty, vindictive mother, trying to claw back gifts you gave. I know, I said. That's exactly what they'll try, but I won't let them. My argument is not that I want the money back. My argument is that this lawsuit, for the exact amount of my cash wedding gift, is not an action for damages. It is an act of profound, calculated greed. It proves the absurdity of their claim. But, I said, closing the laptop, that's just the context. That's the defense. I'd like to talk about the offense. Diaz leaned forward, her pen tapping once. I'm listening. I am a project manager. I deal in root cause analysis. The story they're selling doesn't make sense. Why would Chloe Sterling destroy her own $10,000 plus dress? It's illogical. Unless you did it, Diaz pointed out. Unless I did it. I agreed. Or, unless she had a better reason than I did. I can think of 2. Reason 1. She hated the dress. She was a nightmare to every vendor. I know that for a fact. Maybe she was stuck with it. Reason 2. Insurance. A wedding of that cost, at that venue, would be insured up to its eyeballs. A flicker of genuine interest sparked in Diaz's eyes. This is my new project plan, I said. My voice the same one I used to kick off a quarterly review at Aperion. I need you to find the event insurance policy they took out for that wedding. I want to know what it covered, for how much, and what the requirements were for a claim. Second, I need you to subpoena the bridal shop. I want every email, every text message, every fitting note exchanged between them and Chloe. That's a solid line of inquiry, Diaz admitted, already scribbling notes. It establishes motive, but it's still your word against hers in that room. No, it's not, I said. There was a third person, a witness. Diaz stopped writing. What? When I walked in, Chloe was not alone. She was screaming at a young woman, a catering assistant. She was holding the wine glass then. She was enraged before she ever saw me. The girl was terrified. I'm certain Chloe had her fired immediately after. A witness, Diaz said, the words slow and appreciative. I think her name was Sarah. She was young, a student maybe. She saw what happened before I got there. She saw Chloe's state of mind. She saw her holding the wine. She saw me walk in. Mrs. Diaz looked at me, and for the first time, she smiled. It was not a comforting smile. It was the smile of a strategist who had just been handed the winning move. They think this is a family dispute, Diaz said, picking up her phone. They're about to find out it's a deposition. Let's go find Sarah. Mrs. Diaz was a professional, but finding one fired catering assistant in a city of 1 million people was not simple. My days fell into a strange, hollow rhythm. I went to work. I managed my projects at Aperion with a cold, precise focus. But my evenings were silent. The friends I'd once vented to about Mark's college antics or my own work frustrations had grown quiet. This was not a problem they could offer advice on. The very nature of the lawsuit, a son suing his mother over a wedding dress, was so toxic, so bizarre. They just faded. I was isolated. And I understood that this, too, was part of the Sterlings' strategy. 2 weeks after our first meeting, my phone rang. It was Diaz. Her voice was not loyally. It was sharp and bright with triumph. We got her. Eleanor. We got Sarah. We met Sarah at a small, anonymous coffee shop far from the university campus. She was a wisp of a girl, a pre-law student, which made her situation all the more ironic and terrifying. She was visibly shaking, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of tea she wasn't drinking. You have to understand, she whispered, looking at me and Mrs. Diaz. The Sterlings they're not normal. Chloe's father owns the catering company. He owns it. I wasn't just fired. I was blacklisted. My boss told me I'd never work in the event industry in Austin again. We understand, Diaz said, her voice gentle but firm. Just tell us what you saw, from the beginning. Sarah took a shaky breath. It was insane. All night. She was on edge. But then, during the main course, I was serving Mr. Sterling, and my hand must have slipped. A single drop of béarnaise sauce landed on the rim of his plate. Not even on his food. On the plate. She said Chloe saw it. She didn't say anything. Just watched her. 20 minutes later, Chloe found her in the service hallway. She cornered me, Sarah said, her eyes filling with tears. She called me an incompetent little brat. She said I was trying to poison her father. I was just trying to apologize. I kept saying I was sorry. She stormed off toward the bridal suite. I followed her. I was terrified I was going to lose my job. I thought maybe I could apologize again. Fix it. You followed her to the suite? I asked, my heart pounding. I didn't go in. I just stood outside the door. She was on her phone. She was yelling. Sarah closed her eyes, reciting the words from a place of trauma. She said, I don't care what the contract says. This dress is disgusting. It's not what I wanted, and it makes me look fat. Then she listened for a minute, and she said, I don't know. I'll figure it out. The insurance had better pay for a custom one. My blood went cold. That's when you walked in, Mrs. Vance? Sarah said, finally looking at me. She saw you. She hung up the phone, and her face got this awful, smart look, and she picked up the wine. Diaz let the silence hang for a moment. Then she slid a file across the table to me. While my investigator was tracking down Sarah, I was busy with the subpoenas, Diaz said. All business again. It seems your project plan was sound. I opened the file. The first document was a special event insurance rider, taken out by Mark and Chloe. The insured amount for special attire and rings was $70,000. The policy specifically covered accidental damage or staining. The second document was an email chain between Chloe Sterling and the high-end bridal boutique. It began 2 weeks before the wedding. Chloe's emails were frantic, then angry. This is not the fit I approved. The beadwork is tacky. I demand a full refund. The final email was from the boutique owner, dated 3 days before the wedding. Dear Ms. Sterling, as has been explained, the dress is custom-made to your exact specifications. It is non-refundable. We have fulfilled our contract. I looked at the documents. I looked at Sarah. It all came together. A perfect, grotesque picture. This was never about Mark being ashamed of me. This was never about a ruined memory. This was a con. She hated the dress. She was stuck with it. And then, seeing an opportunity, she found a way to not only get rid of it, but to turn a profit. All she needed was a scapegoat. All she needed was someone to blame for the accidental damage. And I had, in my blind maternal hope, walked right into the trap. It was exactly 1 week before the court date. The silence in my apartment had become a heavy, pressurized thing. It was the silence before a storm, or as we called it at Aperion, the go, live or die week. Every action was now critical. On Monday, a courier delivered a box. It wasn't from Diaz. It wasn't from the court. It was a crisp, white shipping box, addressed to me in Mark's familiar, hurried block printing. I thought it might be a last-ditch legal maneuver, some new filing. I took it to my kitchen island and cut the tape with a paring knife. Inside, there was no letter, no note, just bubble wrap. And under the bubble wrap, a lifetime. It was the large, leather-bound photo album I had spent a month curating for him and Chloe as an engagement gift. And stuffed loosely beside it were all the framed photos, the small albums, the shoeboxes of negatives, my entire history as a mother. Mark at his first T-ball game, his face smudged with dirt. Mark, age 6, missing his 2 front teeth, beaming in a tiny blue kindergarten graduation cap. Mark and I at the Grand Canyon, the year after his father died, when I was trying so hard to prove we could still be a whole family. All of it returned. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare, a final, cruel message. You are no longer his family. Your memories are not welcome. You are nothing. They were trying to break me, to send me into that courtroom a shattered, weeping mess. And I almost did. My knees felt weak. I held the photo of his 6-year-old face, the sheer, innocent joy of it, and a sob so deep it ached tore through my chest. This was the boy they were killing. This was the boy he was killing. I stood there for a full minute, letting the grief hit me. I felt the full weight of the loss, the finality of it. This was not my son. My son was gone. Then, I very carefully took the small, framed photo of his kindergarten graduation. I removed it from the cheap silver frame. I folded the small, faded picture in half and slid it into my wallet. It would be the last piece of him I ever carried. I put the rest of the albums, all the pictures, all the memories, back into the box. I taped it shut and carried it to the storage closet. I would not look at it again. My hands were steady. My eyes were dry. I picked up my phone and called Mrs. Diaz. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect," I said, my voice clear and cold. "We have the insurance policy. We have the email chain. We have Sarah's affidavit. It's time. Send them our settlement offer." "Settlement?" Diaz asked, confused. "Eleanor, we're not settling." "Oh, no," I said. "This isn't a settlement. This is an ultimatum. I want you to send a formal offer to their lawyer, right now." Mrs. Diaz sent the offer an hour later. It was a beautiful, terrifying legal document. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that we offered to drop our motion for sanctions, provided that they file a motion to dismiss their own lawsuit, with prejudice, within 24 hours. If they failed to do so, we would be proceeding to court, and we would be formally submitting into evidence Exhibit A, the $70,000 insurance policy, Exhibit B, the email chain with the bridal shop proving pre-existing intent, and Exhibit C, the sworn affidavit of Sarah Jennings, confirming Chloe's statements about hating the dress and committing insurance fraud. We would, the offer concluded, be asking the judge to refer the case to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation into perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud. The response from Chloe's lawyer came 2 hours later. It was a phone call to Diaz, which she relayed to me verbatim. He had, apparently, laughed. "What is this? A joke?" He'd sneered. "These are ridiculous, slanderous accusations. My client is the victim here. Mrs. Diaz. Your client is a desperate, pathetic woman. We'll see you in court." They didn't believe I had it. Or, in their staggering arrogance, they believed their power and money would make it go away. They made their choice. But I needed to be sure of Mark. That night, my phone rang at 11 p.m. It was Mark. I could hear the telltale slur in his voice before he even spoke, the sound of expensive whiskey and weak will. "Mom," he slurred, and I could hear him crying, actual, sobbing tears. "Mom, Chloe told me what your lawyer sent. She's hysterical. You're making things up. You're lying. Why are you doing this? You're ruining my life. You're ruining her." I stood in my dark, quiet apartment, the city lights twinkling below. I had given him every chance. The dinner where I'd been dismissed, the speech he'd allowed to be silenced, the summons he had signed, the office confrontation. Now, this final, drunken plea for me to be the adult, to fold, to take the blame one last time. "Mark," I said, and my voice was perfectly calm. "I gave you an out. Your lawyer had my offer. You chose her. But she says you're lying. She says, then you'll have to live with her consequences. Mark." I hung up the phone. I turned off the ringer. They had taken the bait. The trap was set. It was the night before the hearing. I was in Mrs. Diaz's conference room, the lights of Austin dark jewels below. We were doing the final review. My testimony was pared down to cold, observable facts. I saw her hold the wine. I saw her see me. I saw her throw it on the dress. No emotion, no speculation. "They are going to try to provoke you," Diaz said, closing her binder. "Their whole case relies on painting you as an unstable, hysterical, jealous mother. They will call you a failure. They will say you hated Chloe. Do not, under any circumstances, take the bait. Let them scream. You just look at the judge and deliver the facts. Let the evidence do the talking. They've already tried, I said, thinking of the box of photographs. I'm not hysterical. Mrs. Diaz, I'm just finished. She nodded once, satisfied. I went home. The apartment was silent. I went to my closet and laid out my armor for the next day, not the soft beige dress I had worn to the wedding. I chose a steel grey Armani pantsuit I wore for major stakeholder meetings. It was sharp, severe, and powerful. Not the clothes of a mother, the clothes of a CEO. I sat at my desk and looked at my spreadsheet one last time. $335,000. A number that represented a life's worth of love, now quantified as a bad investment. The time was 9 p.m. I picked up my phone and made one final call. It wasn't to a lawyer. It was to the after-hours management line for Mark and Chloe's penthouse building. A sleepy voice answered. Management. Hello? I said, my voice crisp and professional. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am the financial guarantor on the lease for Unit 2700, the Sterling Vance residence. I am calling to give my formal, written notice to follow. Notification? The manager was suddenly awake. Is there a problem with the unit, Ms. Vance? No, not at all. I am simply informing you that as of today, I am removing myself as guarantor on that lease at the end of its current term. The lease expires in 6 months, I believe. There was a frantic clicking of keys. Ah, yes, I see it. Ms. Vance. I just want to make you aware. The terms of their lease require a guarantor with an income of at least 10 times the monthly rent, or the residents must qualify on their own. I understand, I said. Without you, Ms. Vance. The manager continued, suddenly nervous. They will have to reapply. If they don't meet the income requirements, they will have 30 days' notice to vacate. I understand perfectly, I said. I knew Mark's salary. I knew he was living far above his means, propped up by me and the Sterlings. He could not qualify for that apartment alone, not even close. Please send me the relevant paperwork to begin the process. Thank you. I hung up. It was not part of the lawsuit. It was not revenge. It was risk mitigation. I was simply cutting the last safety line I had provided, the one they were still using while they tried to sink me. My laptop chimed. A new email. It was from a name I didn't recognize, but the signature was clear. Jonathan Sterling, Esq, Chloe's father. The message was short, sent from his official law firm account, a clear intimidation tactic. Mrs. Vance, it read. I am aware of the spurious and defamatory evidence your counsel has threatened to produce. I am writing to you as a concerned party, not as an attorney. I strongly advise you to accept my client's generous settlement offer tomorrow morning. The $50,000 will cover the dress. Do not make this worse for yourself. Professionally. This can all be resolved quietly. The threat was clear. My job at Aperion, my reputation. I looked at his email. I thought about his daughter's manufactured tears, about my son's weak-willed betrayal. I hit reply. My response was 3 words. See you in court. I sent the email. Then I powered down my laptop, turned off my phone, and went to bed. The courtroom was small and airless, smelling of old varnish and weak coffee. It was packed. Mark and Chloe sat at the table opposite me, radiating a smug confidence. Chloe was in a pale blue dress, the picture of wronged innocence, and she periodically lifted a handkerchief to dab at the corners of her eyes. Her father, Jonathan Sterling, sat in the front row directly behind me, a heavy, intimidating presence I refused to acknowledge. Their lawyer went first, his voice dripping with synthetic outrage. He portrayed me as a tragic, obsessive figure. "Eleanor Vance," he said, gesturing toward me as if I were a piece of evidence. "A woman consumed by the loss of her son to another woman, who in a final, desperate act of jealous rage, destroyed the most sacred symbol of their union." Then Chloe took the stand. It was a masterful performance. She wept, her voice breaking as she described her horror and the absolute terror she felt. I saw the anger in her eyes. She whispered, looking at the judge. I was so scared. She just hated me so much. Then, it was Mrs. Diaz's turn. Her voice was a calm, precise counterpoint to the hysterics. "The defense calls Sarah Jennings." Sarah walked to the stand, her hands visibly trembling. But when she spoke, her voice was clear. She told the court about the incident with the Béarnaise sauce. She told them about following Chloe to the bridal suite. "I heard her on the phone," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "She was yelling. She said the dress was disgusting and tacky, and I heard her say, 'The insurance had better pay for a custom one.'" A ripple went through the courtroom. Chloe's lawyer jumped up to object, but the judge, a sharp, older woman who looked utterly unimpressed by Chloe's tears, waved him down. "Your Honor," Mrs. Diaz continued, her voice like ice. "I submit Exhibit A, a series of emails between the plaintiff, Miss Sterling, and the bridal boutique, dated the week before the wedding, in which Ms. Sterling demands a full refund." Mrs. Diaz did not pause. "And I submit Exhibit B, the special event insurance policy taken out by the plaintiffs, which covers accidental damage to bridal attire for the sum of $70,000. I saw Chloe's face. The colour drained from it, leaving a waxy, pale sheen. I saw Mark, for the first time, turn his head and look at his wife, not with love, with a dawning, sick confusion. "The defense calls Eleanor Vance," Diaz said. I walked to the stand. I did not look at Mark. I looked only at the judge. I calmly recounted the facts. I walked into the room. She was holding the wine. She saw me. She looked at me. She looked at the dress, and she threw the wine onto the dress. Their lawyer came at me, his face red. "You hated her. You were jealous. You paid $50,000 for that wedding, and you were angry you weren't in control." I did not respond to him. I kept my eyes on the judge. "Your Honor," I said, my voice strong and clear. "He is correct about the money. I did pay $50,000 for the wedding. I also paid $180,000 for my son's law school tuition, and I paid $75,000 for the down payment on his condominium. They are suing me for the only money I gifted them." I leaned forward slightly. "This lawsuit was never about a dress. It is about greed." The courtroom was dead silent. The judge stared at me for a long, heavy moment. Then, she turned her full attention to Chloe. "Ms. Sterling," the judge said, her voice suddenly like steel. "Are you aware that insurance fraud is a felony? Are you aware that perjury, which is lying under oath in my courtroom, is also a felony?" The performance ended. Chloe's face dissolved. A sound, a raw, guttural sob of pure terror, ripped out of her. These were not the delicate, handkerchief-dabbing tears. This was the sound of a con artist being caught. The judge struck her gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. This case is dismissed, with prejudice. It cannot be refiled. She wasn't done. Furthermore, the judge said, her eyes boring into Chloe, I am referring this entire case file, including the insurance policy and the testimony of Ms. Jennings, to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation into insurance fraud and perjury. Mark looked like he had been hollowed out. He was just staring, paralyzed. Chloe collapsed onto the table, not in sadness, but in a complete, shuddering breakdown of panic, finally understanding that she was not getting a check. She was getting a criminal record. I stood up. I buttoned my suit jacket. I adjusted my cuffs. I looked, just once, at the absolute ruin of the man my son had become. Then I turned, walked out of the courtroom alone, and did not look back.